these days, used almost flagrantly by the population. The question becomes, what traits are universal really across the whole of the human species? You really can't define human nature without that essentially being the case. Well, rather than speculate, which is again what the great majority of the public does in this, and in fact I'm going to talk about it a little bit later as an argument that moves against us, people often bring this up. Let's actually think about what we actually know. Human nature in a general sense is at least a set of immutable human needs that run through the species without exception. Needs which are not only govern our physical health, which is the first thing most people think of when we think of the human needs, which is food, but can actually also trigger different predictable behavioral and physiological tendencies that are quite elusive in the organism. They're not readily apparent in the sense of causality that we typically think of. Furthermore, it isn't just those needs must be met in a traditional input sense. There's also the very real need for all of us to have protection against other forms of stimulus that can corrupt us, that can distort us. As will be touched upon in a moment, certain environmental or social stressors, for example, can create profound yet initially unnoticed consequences in human development. It's a very misunderstood and underappreciated fact. Needless to say, if I don't get proper nutrition, water, air, I will cease to exist over time. If I'm exposed to substances that are chemically toxic to my biology, such as ingesting mercury or the like, I will likely get very sick or have permanent brain damage. If I suffer a serious vitamin deficiency as a child, there's a predictable detrimental outcome for my personal health, such as stunted growth or immunity deficiencies. But human needs, of course, do not stop at that basic level, and this is really the highlight of this. Humans are biopsychosocial organisms, meaning we're affected by our environment symbiotically in very subtle and complex ways. And before I continue, whose water is this? Mark? Good.
It's all.
For instance, if a mother in the late stages of pregnancy suffers extreme emotional stress, flooding her system with cortisol, the stress hormone, the nervous system of that child could be predictably compromised in a negative way for the rest of his or her life. The fetus is in a stage of learning about what the world actually is. It's a natural evolutionary adaptability of the growing organism. It's extremely important at the earliest stages, including in utero. This goes for infancy and early childhood as well, a critical developmental period where the organism is literally being programmed, adapted to the possible nature of the world they exist in. An impression, by the way, which has been found to carry, again, for the entire life of that person in certain ways. If that critical period is met with severe negative stress, suffering, pain, abuse, that child's development, as we all know intuitively, could develop into predictable tendencies of behavior from what science has been able to teach us, propensities such as addictions and violence in later life. The point here, with respect to human need, is that the physical, mental, and emotional health of a person can no longer be considered an isolated temporal affair. We are social and environmentally connected in an extremely real way, multifaceted. In fact, as an aside, the historical absolute notion of free will, which was touched upon earlier very well, a blanket assumption which is at the core of our legal system, can only be a myth when this understanding is observed. And while, of course, genetics has its obvious place, which I will touch upon a little bit later, there is little denying now that the variation that we see in human health, disease, and in fact human behavior appears to be significantly the result of our social and environmental conditioning, highlights through human needs being met or not being met. In other words, while it's obvious that there's cultural conditioning happening, when it comes to our bare needs and the spectrum of those, it's accentuated when those distortions, when those impressions are met or not met, when we do not get what we need or we are imposed upon by something that we should should not be imposed upon. And the life cycle itself, the pre-programming, pre-learning we have as an organism, has throughout the cycle different responses to those needs. And naturally, the younger you are, the more the effect will pertain and continue for the rest of your life, the more severe the effect. The problem, of course, is that there is an overall lack of acknowledgement of the biopsychosocial context of human need and its profound effect on us. It goes essentially unnoticed overall by our educational system and prison system, not to mention its contrast to a competitive economic world driven by a mentality of independence and self-interest. I would even go so far as to say that the core idea of being responsible and caring towards each other, or even the environment, in fact, on many levels, is actually held in hostility and contempt by many that have been conditioned by the current model. Little in the world we have created today seems to reflect these very real fundamental needs. They are denied by the social institution. The bottom line here is that if we as a society actually care about the well-being of each other, and hence the symbiotic natural law aspects that create and reinforce that progressive state, we are faced with an immutable social imperative. Across the entire spectrum of what we consider public health today, we now see long-term increases overall in cancer, personality disorders, poverty, obviously, familial deprivation, crime, depression, suicide, addiction, violence, self-harm, kids mutilating themselves, obesity, and many other medical, psychological, and anti-social signposts of an out-of-balance society. Something clearly very, very wrong. So returning to my basic point, the core referent of any social system is the human being and its evolutionarily defined, immutable, pre-learned need requirements to develop properly, survive, and maintain good health and prosper. To meet those needs, it becomes a given to have proper management of the Earth's resources and intelligent societal organization to make sure that the biopsychosocial elements, the interconnectivity, is also designed to support us in all the complexity that pertains to it. Anything less, frankly, is really negligence. In the words of Jacques Fresco, you can't just build a society without having access to the necessities of life. So when I use the term comprehensive systems approach, I'm talking about doing an inventory of the area first and determining what that area can supply. Not just an architectural approach, not just a design approach, but the design must be based upon all the requirements to enhance human life. And that's what I mean by an integrated way of thinking. Food, clothing, shelter, warmth, love. All those things are necessary. If you deprive people of any of them, you have a lesser human being, less capable of functioning. So in the end, public health, in the broad view, is the ultimate measure of the performance of any social system, along with the intelligent management of the Earth, which provides the core resources we need, coupled with social conditions, for example, reduced negative stress. That's paramount to a healthy society. The monetary market system, on the other hand, the governing socioeconomic paradigm of our time, which is based entirely around the mere arbitrary movement of money, not the advancement of public health or environmental sustainability as it conflates needs with wants and consumption with progress, shows its true hand when we realize that both human health and the environment which we inhabit are, in fact, provably in decline. You can take all the monetary economic theories, as brilliant and sophisticated as they may sound, on paper and a grand loaded rhetoric of supposed freedom and democracy, and simply compare those ideals to what is actually happening today. There's no contest. In fact, if there was one word to me which summarizes the current socioeconomic paradigm, it would be inefficient. The monetary market system simply has no direct physical reference for any decision. since the entire model was based on the irrational, scientifically empty whims of monetary exchange and often fictional demand. No overarching consideration for the interconnectivity inherent in the world you see around you, no structural interest to efficiently meet the spectrum of human needs and make sure the integrity of each human is sound, regardless of the adverse consequences of the person personally and socially when that is denied. No consideration for the resources which allow for our survival and hence fulfill our needs. In fact, no consideration for the natural orders of balance at all. It is virtually baseless in the light of governing natural law and its demands and restrictions which are immutable. And the world you see around you is proof of that. A resource-based economy, on the other hand, is very, very different. From spring